You'll embarrass yourself, janitor." And the words cracked across the marble like a whip, and every head in that courtroom turned to watch Daniel Carter fail. He was still holding his mop. 51 years old, a stain on his knee, a name badge that read nothing but maintenance. And yet, he let go of that mop handle, let it clatter to the floor, and stood up straight, in a room full of $1,000 suits. A woman was about to lose everything. Nobody in that room would lift a finger to stop it. So the janitor did. 4 words. "I'll take her case." The laughter that followed would haunt every one of them by the end of that week. But here's what none of them knew. The man in the janitor's uniform had once broken lawyers exactly like them in courtrooms, exactly like this one, and he had walked away from all of it for a reason nobody had ever bothered to ask. Before we go further, I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city in the comments right now so I can see how far Daniel's story has traveled across this country. And if you believe a man's worth isn't measured by the uniform he wears, do me a favor and subscribe. You're going to want to see how this one ends. The mop bucket had a squeaky wheel, and Daniel Carter had stopped hearing it years ago. Get you. He pushed it down the 3rd-floor corridor of the Jefferson County Courthouse at 6:40 in the morning, the same way he had every weekday for the better part of 6 years. The building was empty this early. That was the part he liked. No suits brushing past him like he was furniture. No clerks stepping around his wet floor signs with that little sigh, that little tightening of the mouth that said, "Why is this man in my way?" Just Daniel and the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the smell of pine cleaner that had soaked so deep into his hands that his daughter said he smelled like a hospital. "Morning, Danny!" That was Earl, the old security guard, the one man in the whole building who used his first name like it belonged to a person. "Morning, Earl. Cold enough for you?" "My knee's been telling me it's gonna snow since Tuesday." Earl leaned on the metal detector. "You look tired, son." "Ellie had a science project, volcano." Daniel almost smiled. "We used up a whole box of baking soda at 11 o'clock last night." "How's she doing 12 now? 12 going on 40, smarter than me already." "That ain't a high bar, Danny," Earl said, and Daniel laughed. And for a second, the day felt like it might be an ordinary one. It would not be an ordinary one. Courtroom 4B was the big one. High ceilings, dark wood. The kind of room built 100 years ago to make a man feel small when he walked into it. Daniel had a work order taped to his bucket witness stand, loose railing repair before 9 a.m. hearing. He crouched down in front of it with his screwdriver and his box of hardware, and he went to work, because that was what he did. He fixed things other people didn't notice were broken. The railing had a stripped screw. Somebody had over-tightened it. Then, somebody else had wrenched it the wrong way, and now the whole panel wobbled if you leaned on it. Daniel ran his thumb along the joint. Somebody could put their hand there while they testified, he thought. Somebody nervous, somebody scared, and it would give under them at the worst moment. He didn't like that. He fixed it right. He was still down on one knee, tightening the last screw, when the doors opened and the room began to fill. They came in the way powerful people always came, in loud certain taking up space. Daniel knew the type before he even looked up. He didn't need to look up. He could tell a corporate legal team by the sound of their shoes. So the postponement request is a formality. Obviously, she can't proceed. "Did you see the motion pile? We buried her in paper. She hasn't slept in weeks." "The woman's a scientist, Marcus. She thinks she's going to walk in here and explain her way out." Laughter. Comfortable, cruel laughter. Daniel gathered his tools without a word and moved to the back of the room, and nobody noticed him, because nobody ever noticed him. He should have wheeled his bucket out the door. His shift had 100 other things on it. But something kept his feet planted at the back rail, and he told himself it was because the floor was still wet by the gallery bench, and that was a lie, and he knew it was a lie. Then she walked in. Evelyn Moore. He knew the name because it had been in the local paper. The water lady, the engineer who'd built some kind of filter that could pull clean drinking water out of poisoned ground for pennies. There'd been a photo of her standing next to a well in some village overseas, kids all around her, and she'd been lit up in that photo. Radiant. The woman who walked into courtroom 4B was not radiant. She was gray. She had a cardboard banker's box in her arms, hugged to her chest like a life raft, and she was scanning the room for someone who wasn't there. She set the box down. She checked her phone. She checked it again. Daniel watched her thumb move across the screen, watched her face change, and he knew exactly what was happening before she did. Her phone rang. She answered it fast. Richard. Richard, where are you? They're calling us in 10... A pause. Her free hand came up to her mouth. What do you mean withdrawing? You can't, Richard. The hearing is in 10 minutes. The suits at the other table went quiet. Not respectful quiet, hungry quiet. The kind of quiet a wolf makes. You took a retainer from them. Evelyn's voice cracked down the middle. From them, Richard. They're the people suing me. The line went dead. She stood there holding a phone that had nothing left in it. And the lead attorney at the other table. Silver hair, gold watch. A man named Marcus Webb, who Daniel would come to know very well over the next 7 days, leaned back in his chair and smiled at her across the room. Tough morning, Miss Moore. She didn't answer. She couldn't. You know? Webb said loud enough for the whole gallery. There's no shame in settling. Sign the assignment, hand over the patents, and everyone goes home. Save yourself the humiliation. Humiliation. Daniel felt that word land in his own chest, like it had his name on it. The judge came in. Judge Harold Vance, a big tired man with reading glasses that lived halfway down his nose. Everybody stood. Daniel stood too in the back in his gray uniform, and nobody told him not to. Be seated. Vance settled in, flipped open the file, frowned. We're here on Meridian Industries versus Moore. Ms. Moore, I'm going to ask the obvious question. Where is your counsel? Evelyn stood up. Her legs weren't steady, but she stood. Your Honor, my attorney withdrew this morning, just now. A ripple went through the gallery. Webb's team didn't even try to hide their satisfaction. Withdrew, Vance repeated flatly. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have replacement counsel? No, Your Honor, not yet. Vance took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose, and Daniel had cleaned this courtroom long enough to know what that gesture meant. It meant a man who wanted to go home. It meant the path of least resistance. Ms. Moore, the judge said not unkindly, I understand this is difficult, but I have a courtroom full of counsel who are prepared and one party who is not. I'm inclined to grant Meridian's motion. Given the complexity and given that you're now unrepresented, I don't see how we proceed today. Your Honor, please. Evelyn's voice climbed. If you grant their motion, I lose the injunction. If I lose the injunction, they can start manufacturing my technology tomorrow, and once it's in the market, I'll never get it back. I've read the filings. I know what happens next. Ms. Moore. They will bury me in appeals until I'm bankrupt. That's the whole plan. They told my last 3 lawyers to their faces. Ms. Moore, that's enough. Vance's voice had an edge now. I understand you're upset, but I can't manufacture an attorney out of thin air, unless someone in this room is prepared to represent you. He gestured around the gallery with open sarcasm at the reporters and the clerks and the empty benches, which I very much doubt. I'm going to have no choice but to. I'll take her case. The words came out of Daniel Carter's mouth before his brain had signed off on them. Yeah. He heard them the way you hear something break in another room, a distant crack, and then the terrible silence after. Every head in courtroom 4B turned. Every single one. And what they saw was a janitor in a gray uniform standing at the back rail with a mop bucket beside him, one work-worn hand still resting on the wet floor sign. For one full second, nobody said anything at all. Then, Marcus Webb laughed. It started as a snort and became a full rolling, delighted laugh, and his whole team caught it like a cold. And then the reporters caught it, and the sound filled that 100-year-old room and bounced off the dark wood and came back down on Daniel from every direction. "Oh, that's wonderful," Webb said, wiping his eye. The custodian is going to take the case." "Sir?" Judge Vance leaned forward, glasses in hand, staring at the back of the room like he'd never seen it before. "Sir, are you employed by this building?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then you understand you're interrupting a federal proceeding." "I understand it, Your Honor." "Do you have any idea what you just said?" And Daniel's heart was going so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Some voice in the back of his skull, a voice that sounded like 6 years of just a janitor. 6 years of being stepped around like a wet spot on the floor. That voice was screaming, "Sit down. Sit down. You have a daughter. Sit down." He didn't sit down. "I said I'll take her case, Your Honor, if she'll have me." More laughter. Webb turned around in his chair to look at Daniel full on, the way a man looks at something amusing at the zoo. "Friend," Webb said, "do you even know what this case is? This is a 9-figure intellectual property dispute. This is federal patent litigation. The last 3 attorneys who touched this file had Ivy League degrees and ran. And you're going to mop your way to a verdict. You'll embarrass yourself," someone from Webb's table added, and the whole row snickered. Daniel looked at that row of expensive men. He'd cleaned up after 1,000 of them. He'd emptied their trash and wiped their coffee rings off these very tables and listened to them talk about people like they were line items. He knew that laugh. He'd owned that laugh once. That was the part nobody in the room knew yet. "Maybe I will," Daniel said quietly, "but she won't have to do it alone." The laughing stopped a little at that. Not all the way, but a little. Judge Vance was staring at him with an expression that had shifted from irritation to something closer to bewilderment. "Sir, what is your name?" "Daniel Carter, Your Honor." "Mr. Carter, this is not a game and it's not a movie. To appear as counsel in my courtroom, you would have to be a licensed bar-admitted attorney in good standing in this state. Are you telling me that a courthouse janitor is—" "I was Your Honor." The room went very still. "I beg your pardon. I was licensed, bar-admitted, good standing." Daniel's voice didn't shake now. Now that it was out, it didn't shake at all. "I let it go inactive 6 years ago. It can be reinstated." He paused. "I'd have to file for it, but it can be done." Vance sat back slowly in his chair. He looked at the janitor. He looked at his file. He looked at the janitor again. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard in 20 years on this bench," he said. But he didn't gavel it down. Daniel saw that. The gavel didn't come down. Evelyn Moore had turned all the way around in her seat, and she was staring at Daniel like he'd fallen through the ceiling. "Why?" she said. "Just that. Why would you do that? You don't know me." And Daniel, standing there in his gray uniform, with 100 eyes on him, and his whole quiet, careful life coming apart at the seams, said the only true thing he had. "Because I watched a man abandon you for a paycheck 10 minutes ago," he said. "And I watched every person in this room decide you'd already lost. And I've been on the other side of that table, ma'am. I know what it looks like when they've decided a person doesn't count." He swallowed. "I'm tired of watching it happen." Marcus Webb stood up. "Your Honor, this is theater. This man is a maintenance worker. He is not co-counsel. He is not counsel. He is a member of the custodial staff who has inserted himself into a federal patent case for reasons I cannot begin to imagine. I move to have the gallery cleared, and this proceeding." "Sit down, Mr. Webb," Vance said. "Your Honor, I said sit down." Vance put his glasses back on and peered through them at Daniel like a man reading fine print. "Mr. Carter, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to think very hard before you answer, because there are consequences to what you're doing here that I don't think you've considered." "Yes, Your Honor." "If I recess this matter, if I give you time to attempt reinstatement of a license, you say you let lapse 6 years ago and you fail, or you're not, who you say you are. or this is some kind of stunt, you will have wasted this court's time. You will likely lose your job in this building, and you will have given this woman false hope on the worst morning of her professional life." Vance leaned forward. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? I'm telling you that the kindest thing you could do right now is pick up your bucket, walk out that door, and let me handle this." The room waited. Daniel thought about Ellie, about the baking soda volcano still sitting on their kitchen table, about the mortgage and the health insurance that came with this job, and the careful, invisible, safe little life he'd built out of the wreckage of his old one. He thought about how easy it would be to pick up the bucket. Then he thought about the woman in front of him hugging a cardboard box. "Your Honor," Daniel said with respect, "I've spent 6 years walking out that door and letting other people handle it. I'm asking you to let me do something different this one time." You could have heard a pin drop in courtroom 4B. Judge Vance was quiet for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he reached for a pen. "Meridian's motion for summary disposition," he said, "is denied for now." Webb made a noise like he'd been struck. "Ms. Moore is entitled to counsel, and I am not going to strip a woman of her rights because her attorney behaved like a coward this morning." He pointed the pen at Daniel. "Mr. Carter, this court will recess for 7 days. In that time, you will file for reinstatement with the State Bar, and you will provide this court with documentation that you are exactly who you claim to be. If you walk back through those doors a licensed attorney, I will let you stand at that table beside her and God help you." He set the pen down. "If you don't come back at all. We are in recess." The gavel came down. The room erupted. Reporters were already on their phones. Webb was leaning over his table, hissing at his associates. And in the middle of it all, Daniel Carter stood at the back rail, and his knees finally started to shake. Evelyn Moore came to him. She pushed through the crowd and stood in front of him, and up close he could see she'd been holding herself together with nothing but will for a very long time. "You just blew up your entire life," she said, in front of everyone. "For a stranger." "Seems like it," Daniel said. "They're going to come for you. You understand that whoever you were before Meridian is going to dig up every mistake you ever made and put it on the front page. They did it to my last 3 lawyers. They'll do it to a janitor for sport." Daniel bent down and picked up his mop from where it had fallen an hour and a lifetime ago. He set it upright in the bucket. When he straightened up, something had changed in his face, some old thing coming back online. "Ms. Moore," he said, "there is exactly one thing in this world I'm still afraid of, and it's not those men." He nodded toward Webb's table. "I used to be those men. I know every card they're holding because I dealt half of them myself in a life I'm not proud of." He met her eyes. "So let them come dig. There's only one question that matters right now, and it's yours to answer. Do you want a lawyer who went to the right schools and folds when it counts?" He paused. "Or do you want somebody who's got nothing left to lose and knows exactly how these people think?" Evelyn Moore looked at the janitor in the gray uniform for a long moment. Then, for the first time all morning, something came back into her face. Not radiance. Not yet. But something. "Daniel Carter," she said. "You're hired." Across the room, Marcus Webb watched the two of them shake hands, and the smile finally slid off his face. Orchestrated, emotionally rich narrative with pacing dialogue and dramatic twists. Orchestrated, emotionally rich narrative with pacing dialogue and dramatic twists. The handshake was still warm when Marcus Webb crossed the courtroom floor toward them, and he did it slowly, the way a man walks when he wants you to watch him come. "Mr. Carter, is it?" Webb stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, that gold watch catching the light. "I want to shake your hand too, genuinely. It takes a special kind of man to volunteer for a public execution." "Is that what this is?" Daniel said. "That's exactly what this is." Webb smiled. "You seem like a decent fellow, so I'm going to do you a favor, one human being to another. Walk away. Today. Before the reinstatement. Before the filings. Before your name gets attached to this. Because the second you file that paperwork, you stop being a nobody with a mop and you become a target. And I am very, very good at hitting targets. Daniel picked up his bucket. Noted. I'm serious, friend. So am I, Daniel said. You're standing on my wet floor, Mr. Webb. You might want to move. Why? Webb looked down. He was in fact standing right on the edge of the mopped section, and there was something in the way Daniel said it that made the lawyer take a step back before he'd even decided to. A flicker of something crossed Webb's face. Not fear, Webb didn't do fear, but the first small recognition that the janitor wasn't behaving like a man who was scared. And that was worse. Scared men Webb could work with. He'd built a career on scared men. 7 days, Webb said, backing toward his table. Enjoy them. Then he was gone, and the reporters were closing in, and Evelyn grabbed Daniel by the sleeve of his uniform and pulled him toward the side door before a single one of them could get a question out. They ended up in the stairwell, the heavy fire door swinging shut behind them, and for a second, the two of them just stood there breathing in the concrete quiet. That was a threat, Evelyn said. You understand that was a real threat, not a courtroom threat. I understand it. You don't seem worried. Daniel set the bucket down on the landing. Ms. Moore, I've been worried for 6 years straight. About the mortgage, about my daughter, about whether the whooshing sound in the car engine means $800 I don't have. He shook his head slowly. A man in a nice watch telling me he's going to make my life hard. That's a different kind of worry. Almost a relief, honestly. At least it's a fight I can see. She studied him. Up close under the stairwell light, she was doing what smart people always did when they met Daniel, recalculating, trying to reconcile the uniform with the way he talked. You really were a lawyer, she said. It wasn't a question anymore. I really was. A good one. Daniel was quiet, a beat too long. That's not a yes, she said. I was a good one, Daniel said. That's the problem. I was very good at a thing I shouldn't have been doing at all. He picked the bucket back up. I need to get to the Bar Association before they close. And I need to call my daughter's school. And somewhere in there, I need to figure out how to tell a 12-year-old that Daddy just quit being invisible in front of 30 reporters. He almost laughed. You should go home, Ms. Moore. Lock your door. Don't talk to anyone from Meridian. And don't sign anything, no matter who brings it to you or how friendly they seem. Especially if they seem friendly. Me. Evelyn. What? My name is Evelyn. If you're going to blow up your life for me, you can use my first name. Daniel nodded. Okay, Evelyn, go home. She went. And Daniel stood alone in that stairwell for a moment. And then he did something he hadn't done in 6 years. He took the name badge off his uniform, the one that said maintenance, and he put it in his pocket, and he stood up a little straighter, and he went to go reclaim a man he'd spent 6 years trying to bury. The State Bar Association office closed at 5. Daniel got there at 4:40, still in his uniform, and the young woman at the desk looked up at him, and then very deliberately looked back down at her computer. We're about to close, sir. Is this about a building maintenance issue because you'd want the county? I need reinstatement paperwork, Daniel said. For an inactive license, Carter Daniel, Carter. She looked up again, slower this time. You're a member of the bar. Inactive member, 6 years. He put his hands flat on the counter. I need to know exactly what I have to file, exactly what it costs, and exactly how fast it can be done. And I need to know today because I have a hearing in 7 days, and a judge who's expecting documentation. The woman typed his name. Daniel watched her face change as the record came up on her screen, watched her eyes move down the page, then move back up to the top, then move down again. Whatever was on that screen, it wasn't what she'd expected from a man in a janitor's uniform. Mr. Carter, she said carefully, you had quite a record. Long time ago. You handled the Delmont merger litigation. Long time ago, Daniel said again, and something in his voice made her stop reading it out loud. She printed the forms. She walked him through them, and when he had a question, she gave him a real answer instead of a runaround, and by the time he left, it was 5:10, and she'd stayed late to do it. At the door, she said, "Mr. Carter, whatever you did before, I hope you win." And Daniel didn't know what to do with that, so he just said thank you and pushed out into the cold. He was halfway to the bus stop when his phone rang. Unknown number. "This is Daniel." "Mr. Carter." A woman's voice, smooth and professional. "My name is Sandra Klein. I'm a producer with the local affiliate. We're running a segment tonight on the well on what happened in Judge Vance's courtroom this morning, and I was hoping to get a comment from you. You're something of a story already. Courthouse janitor volunteers to fight billion-dollar corporation. It's got legs." Daniel stopped walking. "How did you get this number?" A pause. "It's my job to get numbers, Mr. Carter. So any comment, even a sentence. Our viewers are going to want to know who you are." And there it was, the machine already turning. 12 hours ago, he'd been a man nobody could pick out of a lineup, and now producers had his cell phone. "No comment," Daniel said. "Mr. Carter, this story is running with you or without you. Wouldn't you rather?" "No comment," he said again, and hung up, and stood there in the cold, with the phone buzzing in his hand, as 3 more unknown numbers tried to get through. Webb hadn't been bluffing. It had already started. He turned the phone off. He got on the bus, and he rode home in the dark, past the parts of the city where people were just getting off work, like it was any ordinary Tuesday, and he tried to figure out how he was going to explain any of this to the only person in the world whose opinion actually mattered to him. Ellie was at the kitchen table doing homework when he came in, and the baking soda volcano was still sitting there from the night before, crusted over now, a little sad in the daylight. She didn't look up. "You're late," she said. "Mrs. Petrov made me a grilled cheese. I ate it. There's one for you in the pan." "Thanks, sweetheart." "Dad?" She still hadn't looked up. "You're on the internet." Daniel stopped with his coat half off. "What?" "You're on the internet." Now she looked up, and her 12-year-old face was doing something complicated, half worried, half something he couldn't read. She turned her tablet around. "Kayla sent it to me at lunch. It's a video. Somebody in the courtroom filmed it on their phone. There's like 40,000 people who watched it already. The comments are..." She trailed off. "Some of them are mean, Dad." Daniel sat down slowly across from his daughter. On the screen, shaky and small, was a video of himself of a janitor in a gray uniform, standing up in the back of a courtroom, and a caption underneath in big white letters that read, "Janitor tries to play lawyer, gets destroyed." Done, sire. He watched 30 seconds of it. Watched Webb laugh. Watched himself say, "I'll take her case." Watched the whole room laugh with Webb, and he watched the little number in the corner tick upward as in real time, more strangers found it. "Dad," Ellie said quietly, "why does it say you tried to play lawyer? You are a lawyer. You were. Before." And this was the moment. Daniel had known it was coming the whole bus ride home. He looked at his daughter, who was 12, who was smarter than him, who had watched him mop floors her entire remembered life, and had never once asked why a man who used to argue cases for a living emptied trash cans for a living now. "Ellie," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say anything. Can you do that?" She closed the tablet. "Okay. Before your mom got sick," Daniel said, "I was a lawyer, a corporate lawyer, and I was good at it. Really good. I made a lot of money, and I worked for a lot of big companies, and the thing I was good at, the thing they paid me for, was helping powerful people win against people who weren't powerful." He made himself keep going. "I helped a company push a family off their land once. I helped another one bury a lawsuit from workers who got hurt. I told myself it was just the job. Everybody's got a lawyer. That's how the system works. I was just doing my part. And I believed that. For a long time." "Oh my, Ellie was very still. "Then your mom got sick," Daniel said, and his voice caught, and he pushed through it. And I was in a deposition in another city the day she went into the hospital the first time. I was fighting for some company I don't even remember the name of now, and I missed it. I missed the phone call because I'd told my assistant to hold everything. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I got there in time. It was okay that time, but I sat in that hospital chair at 3 a.m, and I thought about the family whose land I helped take, and I thought if that were me, if I were the one getting pushed, and some slick man in a suit was doing it, I'd want to burn the whole thing down. And I realized I was the man in the suit. I'd been him for years. "So you quit," Ellie said. "So I quit. After Mom passed, I couldn't put the suit back on. Every time I looked at it, I felt sick. I let my license go inactive. I took the first job that had health insurance and steady hours, and let me pick you up from school. And that was the janitor job at the courthouse." He looked at her. "And I don't regret it, baby. Being your dad these last 6 years is the only thing I've ever done that I'm actually proud of." Ellie was quiet for a long moment. "But today you stood up," she said. "Today I stood up." "Why?" And Daniel gave his daughter the honest answer he'd been circling all day. "Because there was a woman in that room, and everybody had already decided she'd lost, and nobody was going to help her. And I've spent 6 years being one of the nobodies. Hiding. Because I was ashamed of who I used to be." He swallowed. "And I looked at her, and I thought I know how to help her. I'm maybe the one person in that whole room who actually knows how to help her. And if I sit here and stay quiet because I'm scared of what people will say, then I'm not a better man than I used to be. I'm just a quieter one." Ellie looked at the frozen video on her tablet. The mean caption. The laughing men. "They're going to say bad things about you," she said. "A lot of them." "Yeah. And you might lose. The lady might lose." "We might," Daniel said. "That's the truth. I'm not going to lie to you about the odds because you're too smart for that. We probably will lose. The people on the other side have more money and more lawyers and every advantage there is." Ellie set the tablet down. "But you were a good father," she said, "and you were still you, this whole time." She looked up at him with those eyes that were too old for her face. "Mrs. Petrov says a man is what he does when it's hard, not when it's easy." She lifted her chin. "So you should do it. And I don't care what the internet says. The internet is stupid." Daniel Carter laughed. Then a real one. The first real laugh of that entire terrible day. And he reached across the crusted-over volcano and pulled his daughter into a hug, and she let him, which at 12 she didn't always do anymore. "When did you get so smart?" he said into her hair. "I've always been smart, Dad. You were just busy mopping." Sa. He was still holding her when his phone, which he'd turned off, buzzed once in his pocket. He'd forgotten he'd turned it back on for the school. He pulled it out. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Evelyn. I need you to come to my office. Tonight. Something happened. Please hurry." And under it, a second text arrived, while he was still reading the first. "They got to one of my people. I don't know who I can trust anymore. Please." Daniel was out the door in 4 minutes. Mrs. Petrov from next door came to sit with Ellie, and Ellie stood in the doorway in her socks and called after him, "Dad, win!" And he didn't have time to answer. He just raised a hand as he half ran to the bus stop, and the whole ride across town, his mind was already moving, already sorting an old machine, grinding back to life after 6 years cold. Evelyn's office was on the 4th floor of a building that had clearly cost her more than she could afford, back when she'd believed she was going to win easily. Half the desks were empty. Layoffs, Daniel guessed. When you're being sued into the ground, payroll is the first thing that bleeds. Evelyn met him at the elevator, and there was a young man beside her, maybe 25, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd been crying and was trying to pretend he hadn't. "This is Marcus," Evelyn said, then caught herself. Not Webb. Marcus Reyes. My paralegal. He's the only one left. Marcus, this is Daniel Carter." Daniel shook the kid's hand. "You want to tell me what happened, son?" Marcus Reyes's voice shook. They called me. Meridian, this afternoon. Somebody from their HR real nice said they had an opening, said, my talents were being wasted here. And the salary it was triple what Evelyn can pay me. And I said I'd think about it, and then the guy said, he stopped. What did he say? Daniel said quietly. He said it would be a real shame if I stayed on a sinking ship. And then he said he knew my mom's name. He knew where she lived. He just dropped it into the conversation like nothing. Oh, how's your mother doing over on Fenwick? Marcus was shaking now. I never told anybody at work where my mom lives. How did he know where my mom lives? Daniel felt something cold and familiar settle into his stomach. He knew exactly how they knew. He'd worked with firms that ran background checks on the friends and families of opposing witnesses. He'd signed off on the invoices. And now hearing it from the other side from a scared kid whose only crime was being loyal to a woman who couldn't protect him. He understood for the first time what those invoices had actually purchased. Marcus, Daniel said. Look at me. Are you going to take their offer? The kid looked at Evelyn, then back at Daniel. I don't want to. But my mom, that's the right instinct. Not wanting to. Daniel kept his voice level and calm, the voice he used to use in the worst moments when everything was falling apart, and somebody in the room needed to not fall apart. Here's what you're going to do. Tomorrow morning, you're going to write down that phone call. Every word you can remember. The time, the number, what they said about your mother, all of it. Because what they just did has a name, and the name is witness intimidation. And it's a felony. He turned to Evelyn. Does he know things? Is he a witness? Would he be at trial? He knows everything, Evelyn said. He's been with me since the beginning. He was there when I built the first prototype. He kept the lab notebooks. The lab notebooks, Daniel repeated. Yes. The dated ones. The ones that show when you invented what you invented. Evelyn went very still. Yes. Daniel looked at Marcus Reyes with new eyes. Son, you're not a paralegal. You're the whole case. That's why they came for you first. Not because you're the weakest, because you're the most important. He put a hand on the kid's shoulder. They just told us where the body's buried by trying to steal the shovel. Do you understand? Their own dirty move just showed me exactly what they're afraid of. Marcus wiped his face. So what do I do? You stay, Daniel said. If you can bear it, and we protect your mother, I'll figure out how I know some people who do exactly that. And you keep those notebooks somewhere they can't get to, because that HR man made one mistake tonight, and it's the same mistake arrogant people always make. Daniel almost smiled. He told us what matters. Something changed in the kid's face. The fear was still there, but there was something underneath it now, something that hadn't been there when Daniel walked off the elevator. He straightened up. Okay, he said. Okay, I'm staying. Good man. Evelyn led Daniel into the conference room, and Marcus went to make coffee because his hands needed something to do, and when the door closed, Evelyn turned to Daniel, and her professional composure finally cracked all the way through. I can't ask him to do that, she whispered. I can't ask that kid to risk his mother for me. What am I doing, Daniel? What are any of us doing? Maybe I should just sign it. Maybe if I give them the patents, they leave everyone alone. And here it was. The hesitation the paper had warned him about, the moment where the exhausted person decides that surrender is the same thing as mercy. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, and he did not tell her it would be okay, because she was too smart for that, same as his daughter. Can I ask you something? He said. The water thing, the filter. Tell me about it. Not the legal version, the real version. Evelyn blinked. What does that have to do with? Humor me. Why'd you build it? She sat down slowly. My grandmother, she said. She grew up in a place where the water made people sick. Kids died from it. Diarrhea. That's it. That's what killed them. Something a bottle of clean water would have fixed. And she used to tell me about it, and I'd think that's insane. That's solvable. Why hasn't anybody solved it? She was somewhere else now, somewhere years back. So I solved it. It took 11 years. It uses materials that cost almost nothing. A village can build one with a technician in $40 of parts. It works. I've seen it work. I stood next to a well in a place where kids used to die, and they don't die anymore because of a thing I built in a garage. And Meridian wants it, Daniel said. Meridian wants to own it. Her voice hardened. They want the patents so they can control who gets it and what it costs. They don't want to give clean water to villages. Daniel, there's no money in villages. They want to license it to governments and corporations at a markup and sit on it so no cheaper version ever exists. If I sign that assignment, the thing I built to save the kids my grandmother watched die becomes just another... Her voice broke. Just another thing rich people keep from poor people, and they'll have my name on it, like I gave it to them. Oh, Mimki so gede. She stopped. She looked at Daniel, and Daniel just let the silence sit there because he'd asked the question for exactly this reason, and now she was hearing her own answer. You already know you can't sign it, he said gently. You just needed to say the water part out loud again to remember why. Evelyn Moore stared at him. You did that on purpose, she said. Yeah. That's a lawyer trick. That's a lawyer trick, Daniel admitted. I've got a lot of them. That one I'm not ashamed of. And Evelyn laughed a wet, exhausted, surprised laugh and wiped her eyes, and when she looked at Daniel again, the surrender was gone from her face, and something harder and better had replaced it. Okay, she said. Okay, we fight. What do we do first? We have 7 days. 6 now. What do we do? Daniel stood up and took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, and for the first time in 6 years, the motion felt like coming home instead of putting on a costume. First, he said, you show me everything. Every filing your last 3 lawyers made and every one they got. Every email from Meridian. Every version of every document. And then you're going to make a lot of coffee because I need to read 8 months of a case that 3 Ivy League attorneys couldn't win, and I need to do it by morning. He looked at her. Your old lawyers were fighting the wrong war, Evelyn. I could tell from across the courtroom this morning. They were playing defense. They were treating this like a patent dispute you had to survive. He shook his head slowly. It's not a patent dispute. It's a theft. And you don't survive a theft. You expose it. Now bring me the notebooks. By 11 that night, the conference table was buried in paper, and Daniel had a pen behind his ear and 3 legal pads full of notes, and the particular electric focus of a man doing the one thing he was born to do. Marcus kept the coffee coming. Evelyn answered questions until her voice gave out. And somewhere around midnight, Daniel went very quiet in the middle of a stack of Meridian's own filings, and stopped writing, and sat there staring at a single page for so long that Evelyn finally said, What? What is it? You've got to look. Daniel slid the page across the table to her. This is a filing from Meridian, he said, 14 months ago, before they ever accused you of anything. It's a routine document, boring, the kind of thing nobody reads. Their old lawyers filed it, and their new lawyers probably forgot it exists. He tapped it. Read that paragraph, the 3rd one. Evelyn read it. She read it again. Her hand started to shake. This says, she whispered, that they were studying my published research 14 months ago, by name, citing my papers. By name, Daniel said quietly. Citing your papers, 14 months ago. He leaned back in his chair. Which is 9 full months before the date they claim you stole the technology from them. Evelyn, they filed a document in a federal court admitting they were reading your work before the day they say you copied theirs. He let it land. They didn't just lie, they lied on the record, and then they forgot they did it. The conference room went dead silent. Marcus Reyes stood frozen in the doorway with a fresh pot of coffee in his hands. Evelyn stared at the page like it might disappear if she blinked. And Daniel Carter, courthouse janitor, sat in his rolled-up sleeves at midnight with 6 days on the clock, and for the first time since he'd stood up in that courtroom that morning, he let himself smile all the way. They handed it to us, he said softly. They handed us the whole thing, and they don't even know it yet." He picked the page back up and held it like something precious. "Marcus, put the coffee down and get me every document Meridian has ever filed in this case. All of it. Because if they made this mistake once," his eyes came up bright and dangerous, "I promise you they made it more than once." They found 4 more by 3 in the morning. 4 separate documents filed by Meridian's own lawyers over the 18 months before they ever accused Evelyn of anything, and every single one of them referenced her published research by name. Citations, footnotes. In one filing, an entire paragraph praising the elegance of her filtration method, the very method they now claimed she had stolen from them. Daniel spread all 5 pages out on the conference table side by side, and the 3 of them stood over them like people standing over a map of buried treasure. And nobody said anything for a long moment. "I don't understand," Marcus finally said. "If they wrote all this down, if it's right here, why didn't Evelyn's other lawyers find it? 3 of them. Ivy League, you said it yourself." Daniel didn't look up from the pages. "Because they were looking in the wrong place, son. They were reading Meridian's accusations. They were reading the sword, trying to figure out how to block it." He tapped the 5 documents. "Nobody reads the boring stuff. The routine filings. The disclosures nobody thinks matter. Those 3 lawyers were smart, but they were smart the way you get taught to be smart in school. They went straight for the fight. They never went digging through 18 months of paperwork looking for the one paragraph where the other side forgot to lie." "And you did," Evelyn said quietly. "I did?" Daniel straightened up and his back cracked and he winced. "Because I used to be the guy who buried the paragraph, Evelyn. When I worked for the big firms, this was my job. Take an inconvenient fact and drown it in 10,000 pages of legitimate-looking documents so that when the other side goes looking, they give up before they find it." He shook his head slowly. "I know where the bodies are buried because I helped bury a few. That's not something I'm proud of. But right now, it's the most useful thing about me." It was the kind of confession that could have sat heavy in the room, but there wasn't time to sit with it. Daniel was already moving. He gathered the 5 pages, made copies, put the originals in a folder, put the folder in his bag, and put the bag on his own shoulder where he could feel it. "We don't leave these lying around," he said. "We don't email them. We don't talk about them on the phone. From this second forward, you both assume Meridian can hear everything you say on any device you own. Because they probably can, or close to it." He looked at Marcus. "That HR man who knew where your mother lives. That's the tip of it. These people play dirty as a matter of routine. So we're going to be careful in a way that's going to feel paranoid, and we're going to do it anyway." Marcus nodded. Then he said in a small voice, "Mr. Carter, can I ask you something?" "Daniel. And yeah. Are we going to win?" Daniel looked at the kid, 25, terrified, loyal enough to stay on a ship everyone said was sinking, and he gave him the same thing he'd given his daughter. "The truth. I don't know," Daniel said. "We just found something huge tonight. But finding it and being allowed to use it are 2 different things, and Meridian's got a week to figure out we found it, and 100 ways to keep it out of that courtroom." He put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "So here's what I know. We've got a real shot now. 6 hours ago we didn't. That's the honest answer. We went from no chance to a shot in one night because you stayed, and Evelyn didn't sign. That's not nothing, son. That's everything." It was almost 4 in the morning when Daniel finally left, and he took the bus home in the empty dark and let himself into the apartment as quiet as he could, and Mrs. Petrov was asleep on the couch with the TV murmuring, and Ellie was in bed. He stood in his daughter's doorway for a minute, just watching her breathe. Then he lay down on top of his own covers, still in his clothes, and he closed his eyes, and he did not sleep because his mind would not stop moving. 6 days. The first day Meridian came at them sideways. It started at 9 in the morning with a courier at Evelyn's office, a thick envelope hand-delivered containing a settlement offer. Not the old offer, a new one, sweeter. Meridian would pay Evelyn $4 million, let her keep her name on the patents in a consulting capacity, and drop all claims. All she had to do was assign them exclusive manufacturing rights. Evelyn called Daniel and read it to him over a landline he'd told her to use, and he could hear in her voice that $4 million was doing something to her. "That's real money, Daniel," she said. "I've got employees I laid off. I've got investors who trusted me. $4 million and everybody walks away, and I don't have to watch a 25-year-old kid risk his mother for me." "You want my honest read?" Daniel said. "Yes. They found out we've got something." Daniel kept his voice flat and certain. "I don't know how. Maybe they've got someone watching your office. Maybe they just know their own file is a mess and they're getting nervous. But yesterday they wanted to bury you. Today they want to pay you to go away quietly. Companies like Meridian don't get generous, Evelyn. They get scared. And a $4 million settlement the day before a hearing isn't mercy. It's a company that just realized it might lose something worth a lot more than $4 million if this goes in front of a judge." The line was quiet. "So the offer is good news," Evelyn said slowly. "The offer is the best news we've gotten. It means they're afraid, which means you should absolutely under no circumstances take it." Daniel paused. "Unless you want to. That part's yours. Evelyn, not mine. If $4 million and out is what you need for your life, I'll respect it, and I'll help you get the best version of that deal. But if you take it, that filter you built to save kids from dirty water disappears into Meridian's vault forever. That's the trade. $4 million, and the thing your grandmother's stories built dies in a filing cabinet." "I'm getting it," he heard her breathe out. "Send it back," Evelyn said. "Unsigned." "That's my girl." The second wave came at the paralegal. That afternoon, 2 men from the state licensing board showed up at Evelyn's office, polite professional badges and everything, and informed Marcus Reyes that an anonymous complaint had been filed alleging he was engaged in the unauthorized practice of law. It was nonsense. Marcus was a paralegal doing paralegal work under a licensed attorney. But the complaint meant an investigation, and the investigation meant paperwork and interviews and stress, and the whole point was never to win the complaint. The whole point was to make a scared kid more scared. Daniel got there within the hour, and he read the complaint, and he almost laughed at how thin it was. "This is garbage," he told Marcus. "This is a company trying to knock you off balance because they can't buy you and they can't scare you off with your mom. You know what this complaint actually proves?" He held it up. "It proves they're desperate to get you away from this case. Same as the job offer, same as the mom thing. 3 times now they've tried to remove you specifically. You want to know your value, Marcus. Read your enemy's mail. They've told you 3 times you're the most important person in this building." Huh? And something extraordinary happened then. Marcus Reyes, who had cried in a stairwell 2 nights ago, who had been shaking when Daniel first met him. Marcus laughed, a real laugh. He took the complaint out of Daniel's hand, and he looked at it, and he said, "Then I guess I better stay important." Daniel clapped him on the back. There it is. But that night, the attack landed somewhere Daniel hadn't armored. It landed on Ellie. Meh. He came home to find his daughter sitting at the kitchen table not doing homework, which was wrong because Ellie always did homework, and her face was blotchy in the way that meant she'd been crying and had stopped a while ago and was trying to look like she hadn't. "Ellie, what happened?" "Nothing." "Ellie." She wouldn't look at him. "Some kids at school, they saw the video, the one where everybody laughs at you." Her voice was very small. "And Tyler Brennan said his dad said you're a fraud. He said you're a janitor pretending to be a lawyer to get famous. He said you're going to lose, and everybody's going to laugh, and then we'll have to move because you'll get fired." She finally looked up, and her eyes filled again. "Is that true, Dad? Are we going to have to move?" Daniel sat down, slowly, and for one long, terrible moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in the courtroom. Hadn't felt facing Webb. Hadn't felt at 4 a.m, drowning in paper. He felt the pull to quit. Not for himself, For her. Because Webb could threaten him all day. And it just made Daniel dig in. But this was his daughter crying at a kitchen table because of a choice he'd made. He almost said it. Maybe I should walk away. The words were right there. And then he remembered what she'd told him 2 nights ago sitting at the same table. A man is what he does when it's hard. Ellie, he said. Tyler Brennan's dad is wrong about the fraud part. I really was a lawyer and a good one, and I'm going to be one again. That part's not true. He took a breath. But I'm not going to lie to you about the rest, because I promised you I wouldn't. Could I lose? Yes. Could things get hard? Could money get tight? Could I lose this job? Yes to all of it. That's the risk. I knew it when I stood up, and I stood up anyway. But why? Ellie burst out. Why us? Why did it have to be you? There were 100 people in that room. You said there were. Why did you have to be the one? Because I was the only one who could, Daniel said quietly. And baby, I need you to hear this because it's the most important thing I'll ever teach you. When you're the only one who can help somebody, and you don't because you're scared of what it'll cost you, that costs you something too. It costs you the person you could have been. He reached across the table. 2 nights ago, you told me a man is what he does when it's hard. You want to know where I learned that a person's worth isn't about their job or their money or what strangers say about them on the internet. I learned it from a 12-year-old. I learned it from you. Ellie was crying openly now, but it was different crying. Are you scared? She asked. Every minute, Daniel said. But I'd rather be scared and be somebody you're proud of than be safe and be a man who sat down when it counted. Now. He wiped her face with his thumb, the way he had when she was little. You want to do something about Tyler Brennan's dad? She sniffed. Like what? You want to come watch me win. The 4th day Daniel went on offense. He'd found the 5 documents, but finding them wasn't enough. He needed to lock them in place so Meridian couldn't wriggle out. Couldn't claim the citations meant something else, couldn't argue. The dates were coincidence. So he did the thing his old firm had taught him, the patient, boring, deadly thing. He built a timeline. Every document, every date, every public version of Evelyn's research with a verifiable publication date stamped by a university, cross-referenced against every date in Meridian's own filings. He built it so airtight that a jury could follow it, so simple that a judge couldn't dismiss it, so grounded in Meridian's own words that they'd have to call themselves liars to escape it. And then on the 4th night, Marcus Reyes came into the conference room white as a sheet and said, Daniel, you need to see this, now. He'd been going through the lab notebooks, the dated ones, the ones that were the whole case, cross-checking them against the timeline, and he'd found something, a gap. 8 months where a whole notebook was supposed to exist, the notebook that would have shown the crucial period, the exact months when Meridian claimed Evelyn stole from them, and the notebook wasn't there. It's gone, Marcus said. Notebook 6. It's not in the archive. I've looked 3 times. Daniel felt the floor drop out from under him. Without that notebook, the timeline had a hole in it exactly where Meridian would attack. Everything he'd built for 4 days had a soft spot, and it was the softest spot possible, and Meridian's lawyers would find it in about 4 seconds. Evelyn, Daniel said, keeping his voice very steady. Where's notebook 6? Evelyn came over and looked at the gap, and Daniel watched the blood leave her face too. I don't know, she whispered. It was in the archive. It's always been in the archive. All of them are in the... She stopped. Oh God, the break-in. What break-in? 11 months ago, somebody broke into the lab. The police said it was probably kids. Nothing valuable was taken. Just some papers were scattered. We assumed vandalism. Her voice was climbing. But if they took notebook 6, if Meridian took the one notebook that proves my timeline, Daniel, they've had it for 11 months. They know exactly what's in it. They know it's the one that... Stop. Daniel put both hands flat on the table. Everybody stop and breathe. Marcus, sit down. Evelyn, sit down. They sat. Daniel stayed standing, thinking that old machine grinding at full speed. Okay, let's think about this correctly instead of panicking. If Meridian stole notebook 611 months ago, why haven't they used it? Why isn't it in their filings? If they had a notebook that hurt you, they'd have waved it in front of the judge on day one. Evelyn blinked. They haven't used it. They haven't used it, Daniel repeated. Which means one of two things. Either they don't have it, and it's just genuinely lost. Which happens. Labs are messy, or they do have it. And the reason they haven't used it is that it doesn't hurt you at all. It helps you. It's got a date in it that proves your timeline, and if they revealed they had it, they'd have to explain how they got it, which is by breaking into your lab. Daniel's eyes came alive. They can't use it without admitting they stole it. Either way, Evelyn, either way, the missing notebook isn't your problem. It's theirs. Marcus stared at him. How do you just think like that? 12 years of thinking like a bad guy, Daniel said grimly. Now let's use it for something good. Marcus, that police report on the break-in 11 months ago. I want it, and I want the exact date. He was already pulling a fresh legal pad toward him. Because if that break-in date lines up with the moment Meridian's own filings show they got nervous about your research, then the missing notebook stops being a hole in our case. It becomes proof of the whole conspiracy. It was almost midnight the fifth night, and they were close now, so close Daniel could taste it when his phone rang. Not the office phone, his personal cell, unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Then some instinct made him. This is Daniel. Mr. Carter? It was Webb, smooth as ever. But there was something underneath it now, something Daniel recognized because he used to have it too, the sound of a man who stopped finding the situation funny. I hear you've been busy. Long nights, lots of coffee. It's admirable, honestly. Doomed, but admirable. You're calling me at midnight to tell me I'm doomed. I'm calling you at midnight, Webb said, to make you an offer that has nothing to do with Ms. Moore. This one's just for you. A pause. I've looked into you, Daniel. Really looked. And I found the Delmont matter. I found what happened at the end of your career. I found the part you don't put on a resume. Webb let it hang there. I know why you really quit. And I don't think it's the noble little story you've been telling that 12-year-old girl of yours. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. Across the conference room, Evelyn looked up, saw his face, and went still. You've got about 3 seconds, Daniel said quietly, to get to the part where you think this helps you. Here's the part, Webb said. Walk away from this case and the Delmont matter stays buried where you left it. Stay on it. Walk into that courtroom tomorrow and I put it in front of the judge, in front of the reporters, in front of everyone. And your comeback story, the janitor who found his honor again, becomes a very different story. The story of why a hotshot lawyer really left the profession. Webb's voice was almost gentle now. You've got a daughter to think about, Daniel. Think about how she'll look at you. That's all I'm asking. Just think about it. And the line went dead. Daniel stood there in the conference room with the phone in his hand, and every drop of color drained from his face, and Evelyn crossed the room to him fast. Daniel! Daniel, what did he say? You look like... He knows about Delmont, Daniel said. His voice was strange far away. What's Delmont? Daniel looked at her, and for a moment he was somewhere else entirely. 6 years back in a life he'd spent every day since trying not to remember. Then he came back. It's the reason I really left the law, he said quietly. It's not the whole story I told my daughter. That story's true. The family's land, your mom in the hospital, all of it's true. But there's a piece I've never told anyone. And Webb just found it. He set the phone down on the table with a hand that wasn't quite steady. And if I stand up in that courtroom tomorrow, he's going to use it to destroy me in front of Ellie. The conference room was dead silent. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway again, the way he had 2 nights ago. Evelyn stared at Daniel, and Daniel stared at nothing. And the clock on the wall said 12:04 a.m. which meant the hearing was in less than 8 hours, which meant the man who'd told a scared kid, "We've got a real shot now," had exactly one night to decide whether to save Evelyn Moore or save himself. "Daniel," Evelyn said softly, "what did you do at Delmont? What is it he found?" Daniel Carter was quiet for a long, long moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down heavily and put his face in his hands, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You deserve to know," he said, "before you decide if you still want me standing next to you tomorrow. So I'm going to tell you. All of it. The part I've never said out loud to anyone." He lowered his hands and looked her dead in the eye. "And then you can fire me if you want to. Nobody would blame you." "Delmont was my last case," Daniel said. "The one I told you about, the family whose land got pushed through. That was Delmont. But that's not the part Webb found." "Jambe." Evelyn pulled a chair around and sat down close, and Marcus came into the room quietly and stood against the wall, and neither of them said a word. "There was an old man on that land," Daniel said. "Frank Delmont, 78 years old. His family had farmed it for 4 generations, and my client wanted it for a development, and it was worth a fortune, and Frank wouldn't sell. So they hired me." Daniel stared at his own hands. "And I did what I was good at. I found every angle. Back taxes he'd missed by a technicality. An easement dispute from 1970. I buried that old man in paper the same way Meridian's trying to bury you. And it worked. He lost the land." Daniel's voice dropped. "But that's not the part either." "Then what is?" Evelyn said softly. 2 weeks before the final ruling, Frank Delmont came to see me. Not his lawyer, him. Just showed up at my office, old man in a good suit. He probably wore to church. And he asked to talk to me man to man. And he told me he had a heart condition. He told me the stress of the case was going to kill him. The doctors had told him so. And he wasn't asking me to give up the land. He was just asking me to slow down. Give him more time. Let him die on his own farm instead of losing it first." Daniel's jaw worked. "And I had a document in my drawer. A medical disclosure, something his own lawyer had filed by accident that I wasn't supposed to have but did. It confirmed everything he said. The heart condition was real. The doctors were right." The room had gone very still. "And I used it," Daniel said. "I didn't slow down. I sped up. I took that medical information, and I used it to push the timeline faster because I knew if we moved fast enough, he might not have the strength to keep fighting. I told myself I was just being efficient for my client." He looked up, and his eyes were wet. "Frank Delmont had a heart attack the day the ruling came down. He lived, he survived it, but he lost the farm and his health in the same week, and I did it on purpose. I saw a sick old man, and I saw an advantage, and I chose the advantage. That's the part Webb found. There's a paper trail. My own notes. I used a dying man's medical records as a weapon." Nobody spoke. The clock read 12:19 a.m. "That's why I really quit," Daniel said. "Not the noble version, the real one. I quit because I looked at what I'd done to Frank Delmont, and I understood I'd become something I couldn't stand to be. My wife dying, that's real, that broke me open, that's when I finally saw it. But Frank Delmont is the thing I saw. And I've spent 6 years mopping floors trying to become a man who would never do that again." He spread his hands. "And now, Webb's going to stand up in front of a judge and a room full of reporters and my daughter, and he's going to tell them all that the janitor lawyer once tortured a dying man for a paycheck. And the worst part, Evelyn, the worst part is it's true." He sat back. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "So there it is," he said. "That's your lawyer. A man who did the exact thing Meridian is doing to you to somebody just like you, and enjoyed the paycheck. If you want to walk into that courtroom alone tomorrow and take your chances, I understand. You'd be right to." For a long moment, Evelyn Moore said nothing. Then she leaned forward. "Daniel," she said, "look at me. When did Frank Delmont happen?" 6 years ago. "And in 6 years, how many times have you thought about that old man?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Every day. Just about every single day." "Every day. Evelyn repeated. For 6 years. A man who didn't care wouldn't think about it once. She reached out and put her hand flat on the table between them. You want to know what I hear when you tell me that story? I don't hear a monster. I hear the one lawyer in this entire city who knows exactly what it feels like to be Frank Delmont because he's the one who did it. You're not disqualified from helping me, Daniel. You're the only person alive who understands both sides of that table well enough to actually win this. Webb thinks Frank Delmont is a weapon he can use against you. Her voice hardened. I think Frank Delmont is the reason you're the only man who can beat him. Daniel stared at her. You're not firing me, he said slowly. I'm not firing you. I'm telling you to use it. Evelyn stood up. You've spent 6 years being ashamed of who you were. Fine. Be ashamed. But tomorrow, you're going to take everything you learned being that man, and you're going to point it at Marcus Webb, who is right now the man you used to be doing to me what you did to Frank Delmont. You want redemption, Daniel? This is it. This is the whole thing. Stop hiding from Frank Delmont and start fighting for him. And Marcus Reyes from against the wall said quietly, She's right, Daniel. What you're scared of him telling everyone, it's not your weakness. It's the reason we trust you. A guy who never did anything wrong wouldn't understand these people. You do. So beat them. Daniel looked between the two of them. Something was moving in his chest, some heavy stone that had been sitting on him for 6 years, shifting for the first time. If I walk in there, he said, Webb's going to say it out loud, in front of Ellie. Then you say it first, Evelyn said. Daniel blinked. What? You heard me. You get up there tomorrow, and before Webb can make it a weapon, you take it away from him. You tell the truth first. You tell the judge who you were. You tell them about Frank Delmont yourself. Her eyes were bright. A secret is only a weapon if you're hiding it. The second you say it out loud in your own words, it stops being ammunition and starts being, I don't know, a testimony. You turn the thing he's going to attack you with into the thing that proves you're not that man anymore. She almost smiled. Isn't that a lawyer trick, Daniel? You taught me one. Let me teach you one back. Daya. For a moment, Daniel Carter just looked at this woman he'd known for 6 days. This stranger he'd blown up his life for, and then something broke across his face that was almost a smile and almost tears, and was mostly just relief. When did you get so good at this? He said. I had a good lawyer, she said. They didn't sleep. There was no point. At 4 a.m., Daniel filed his reinstatement documents electronically, the second the portal opened, and by 6, he had the confirmation in his hand. Daniel Carter licensed active good standing, exactly as he'd told Judge Vance he would be. He looked at that confirmation for a long time. Then he went home, and he showered, and from the very back of his closet behind 6 years of janitor uniforms, he pulled out a suit. Charcoal gray. It still fit. It smelled like the past. Ellie was up when he came out. She'd put on her nicest dress without being asked. She took one look at her father in the suit, and her eyes went wide. Dad, she said, you look like a lawyer. I am a lawyer, baby. He crouched down to her level. Ellie, I need to tell you something before we go, and I need to tell you myself before you might hear it from anybody else. Because I promised I'd never lie to you. He took her hands. Today in that courtroom, the bad lawyer, Mr. Webb, he might say some true things about your dad, about mistakes I made a long time ago before you were old enough to remember. Bad ones. And I'm going to stand up and admit them out loud, in front of everybody. And I need you to know I'm not ashamed to have you hear them, because the whole reason I'm telling the truth is you. You taught me a man is what he does when it's hard. Well, this is the hard part. This is me doing it. Okay. Ellie looked at him for a long moment with those eyes that were too old for her face. Okay, Dad, she said. I already know you're good. Whatever he says won't change it. Daniel Carter had to look away for a second so his daughter wouldn't see his face. The courtroom was packed. 8:52 a.m. Word had gotten out. The janitor lawyer was back, license and all, and the reporters who'd filmed him getting laughed at a week ago were back too, hoping for a sequel. Webb's team filled their table, 6 of them now, and Webb himself sat in the middle looking relaxed, looking certain, looking exactly like a man holding a card he knew would win. Evelyn sat beside Daniel at the counsel table, and Marcus sat behind them. And in the front row of the gallery sat one 12-year-old girl in her nicest dress, hands folded in her lap. Judge Vance came in at 9 sharp. He looked at Daniel, really looked, taking in the suit, the confirmation of reinstatement already in his file. "Well, Mr. Carter," Vance said, "I'll admit it. I didn't think you'd be standing there. You're licensed. You're active. You did exactly what you said you'd do." He almost smiled, then caught himself. "That buys you the right to stand at that table. It doesn't buy you anything else. Are you prepared to proceed?" "I am, Your Honor." "Then let's begin. Mr. Webb, this is your motion. The floor is yours." And Webb stood and buttoned his jacket, and Daniel saw it coming. A half-second before it happened, saw Webb's eyes flick toward the gallery, toward Ellie, saw him decide to lead with the knife. "Your Honor," Webb began smoothly. "Before we address the technical matters, I feel the court should know something about the character of the man who suddenly appeared as opposing counsel. Because Mr. Carter presents himself as a humble public servant, a janitor with a heart of gold. But the truth about why he left the practice of law is—" "Your Honor." Daniel stood up. "May I?" Vance frowned. "Mr. Webb has the floor, Mr. Carter." "I understand, Your Honor. But Mr. Webb is about to tell the court about a case called Delmont from 6 years ago, and I'd like to save him the trouble." Daniel's voice was steady and clear and carried to every corner of that 100-year-old room. "Because I'd rather the court hear it from me." The room went dead silent. Webb's mouth was still open. This was not the script. "Your Honor," Daniel said, "6 years ago I was a corporate attorney, and I was good at it, and I did something I am deeply ashamed of. I represented a developer against a 78-year-old farmer named Frank Delmont, and I came into possession of his private medical records, a heart condition, and instead of showing that old man mercy, I used his illness against him to speed up the case, hoping he'd be too sick to keep fighting. He had a heart attack the week he lost his farm." Daniel didn't flinch, didn't look away. "I've never said that out loud before today, but I'm saying it now on the record in open court because Mr. Webb was about to use it to suggest I'm unfit to stand here. And he's half right. The man who did that to Frank Delmont was unfit. That's exactly why I quit. That's why I've spent 6 years cleaning the floors of this very building instead of practicing law." You could have heard a pin drop. But here's what Mr. Webb didn't count on, Your Honor. Daniel turned slowly and looked at Webb across the courtroom. "I know exactly what it looks like when a powerful company uses every dirty tool it has to crush somebody who can't fight back. I know because I used to build those tools. And I'm looking at one right now. Everything Meridian has done to Ms. Moore in the last 8 months, the buried paperwork, the intimidated witnesses, the settlement offers designed to make her surrender out of exhaustion. I recognize all of it, because it's the same playbook I used on Frank Delmont." He turned back to the judge. "So no, Your Honor. I'm not going to pretend I'm a man with a clean history. I'm going to do something better. I'm going to use everything that history taught me to make sure what happened to Frank Delmont does not happen to Evelyn Moore." Judge Vance stared at him for a long moment. Then he took off his glasses. "Mr. Webb," the judge said slowly, "you appear to have lost your opening." A ripple went through the gallery, something that wasn't a laugh but wanted to be. Webb's certainty had cracked visibly for the first time in a week. He recovered fast, he was a professional, but everyone in the room had seen it. "Your Honor." "That's a very moving speech, but it's irrelevant to the motion. The facts of this case are that Ms. Moore misappropriated proprietary technology developed by Meridian Industries." "Then let's talk about the facts," Daniel said. And that was the moment the case turned. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't attack. He did the patient, deadly boring thing his old firm had taught him. He walked the court through the timeline, one document at a time, and every document was Meridian's own. He handed up the first of the 5 filings, the one from 14 months ago, and he read the paragraph aloud, the one where Meridian's own lawyers cited Evelyn's published research by name. "This is Meridian's document, Your Honor, filed by Meridian's own attorneys. In it, they cite Ms. Moore's published research by name, with footnotes, and they date their study of it to a period 9 months before the date they now claim she stole technology from them." Daniel handed up the second document. "Here it is again, and again. The third, and again. The fourth. By my count, Your Honor. Meridian has admitted in 4 separate filings in this very court that they were studying Ms. Moore's work before she supposedly stole theirs. You cannot steal something from someone who is already publicly teaching it to you." Webb was on his feet. "Your Honor, those citations are being taken wildly out of context." "Then provide the context, Mr. Webb," Daniel said. "You filed them. Tell the court what they mean." And Webb couldn't, because there was no context. A citation to Evelyn's work dated in Meridian's own filing meant exactly one thing, and Webb stood there with his mouth working and no answer coming out, and every reporter in the room was writing it down. "Let me help the court understand what's happening," Daniel said, turning to the judge. "Meridian didn't invent this technology and have it stolen. Meridian found Ms. Moore's published research, recognized it was revolutionary, realized they couldn't compete with a scientist giving her work away to save lives, and decided that if they couldn't out-invent her, they'd take it in court instead. They accused her of theft to disguise the fact that they were the ones circling her. Their own paperwork proves it. I didn't find these documents by being clever, Your Honor. I found them because I used to write documents exactly like these, and I know they always leave a fingerprint. Your Honor." Webb tried. "This is speculation dressed up as—" "Then let's talk about the break-in," Daniel said. Webb went still. 11 months ago, someone broke into Ms. Moore's laboratory. The police assumed vandalism. Nothing of obvious value was taken. Daniel let a beat pass. Except one thing. A single dated lab notebook, the one notebook that documents the exact months in question. The one piece of evidence that would prove beyond any argument when Ms. Moore actually invented her technology. It vanished that night. He looked at Webb. "Now, Your Honor, Ms. Moore's notebook has been missing for 11 months. And in 11 months, Meridian, who has subpoenaed every scrap of paper this woman ever touched, has never once demanded it. Never asked where it is. Never mentioned it exists." Daniel's voice was very quiet now, and the whole room leaned in. Why would a company that's suing for theft ignore the single most important piece of evidence? There's only one reason. Because they already know exactly what it says. Because they already have it. The gallery made a sound. Webb's associates were suddenly whispering to each other. Webb himself had gone the color of paper. "I'm not going to stand here and claim I can prove Meridian committed a burglary, Your Honor," Daniel said. "That's not my job today, and I won't overreach. But I'll say this. A company that studies a woman's research, then accuses her of stealing it, then benefits from the disappearance of the one document that would exonerate her, that is not a company protecting its innovation. That is a company that couldn't win in the lab, so it decided to win in the dark." He turned back to the judge. "Ms. Moore came into this courtroom a week ago and was told she'd already lost before a single fact was heard. All I'm asking, Your Honor, is that this court do the one thing Meridian has spent 8 months and millions of dollars trying to prevent. Look at the actual facts. Their facts. The ones in their own filings. And then decide whether this looks like a theft or a frame." It was 10:47 a.m. when Daniel Carter sat down. Judge Vance was quiet for a long, long moment. He looked at the 5 documents in front of him. He looked at Webb, who had no rebuttal, who for the first time in the entire proceeding had absolutely nothing to say. And then he looked at Daniel, and something had changed in the old judge's face. The skepticism from a week ago was entirely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. And underneath it, something colder aimed squarely at the other table. "Mr. Webb," the judge said, "I've been on this bench a long time, and Mr. Carter has raised questions this morning that I find I cannot unhear." He tapped the documents. "These are your client's own filings. I want an explanation for these citations, and I want it in writing, and out of context is not going to be an acceptable answer." His voice hardened. "And I want to know on the record whether Meridian Industries is in possession of a laboratory notebook belonging to Ms. Moore, under oath." I think we all suddenly have a great deal of interest in the answer to that question. Webb stood up. "Your Honor, I'll need to confer with my client before—" "I imagine you will," Vance said flatly. He picked up his gavel. He looked one more time at the man in the charcoal suit who a week ago had been holding a mop in the back of his courtroom. "Meridian's motion for summary disposition," Judge Vance said, "is denied. Ms. Moore will have her trial, a full trial on the merits with every fact on the table." The gavel came down hard. "And Mr. Carter, welcome back to the bar. We are adjourned." The room erupted. Reporters scrambled for the doors. Webb's team was already in furious whispered crisis at their table. And Evelyn Moore turned to Daniel with tears streaming down her face and gripped both his hands so hard it hurt. "You did it," she whispered. "You stopped them. You actually stopped them." "We got you a trial," Daniel said. "That's all. The fight's not over, Evelyn, but—" He didn't finish because a small body slammed into him from the side, and Ellie Carter wrapped her arms around her father's waist and buried her face in the charcoal suit that smelled like the past, and Daniel put his hand on the back of his daughter's head. And for the first time in 6 years, standing in the middle of a courtroom that had laughed at him a week ago, he didn't feel invisible at all. Across the room, Marcus Webb slid his own confession of a face into a mask of professional calm, gathered his papers, and walked out past the man he'd tried to destroy, and he didn't say a single word, because for the first time in his career, Marcus Webb had absolutely nothing left to say. The story of what happened in Judge Vance's courtroom did not stay in Judge Vance's courtroom. By that afternoon, the video was everywhere. Not the old one, not the janitor getting laughed at, but a new one. Somebody had filmed Daniel's opening. The confession about Frank Delmont. The 5 documents. The moment Webb stood there with nothing to say. And the caption on this one didn't say, "Gets destroyed." This one said, "Janitor lawyer takes down billion-dollar corporation." Within 2 days, it had 11 million views. Sandra Klein, the producer who'd cold-called Daniel a week earlier, called again, and this time Daniel didn't hang up, because this time he had something to say. But the thing that changed everything wasn't the views. It was the phone calls. They started the morning after the hearing. Evelyn's office phone, the one that had gone silent when the lawsuits scared everyone away, started ringing, and it didn't stop. And they weren't reporters. They were people. People who used to work at Meridian. People who'd signed things they regretted. People who'd stayed quiet for years because a company with unlimited lawyers had made silence feel like the only safe option, and who had just watched a courthouse janitor stand up and do the one thing they'd been too afraid to do. The first one called at 8:15 in the morning. Marcus took it, and Daniel watched the kid's face change. And then Marcus put his hand over the receiver and whispered, "Daniel, you need to take this. She used to work in Meridian's legal department. She says she has something." Her name was Patricia Vance. No relation to the judge. A coincidence that made Daniel almost laugh, and she'd been a junior attorney at Meridian for 6 years before she quit in disgust. And she remembered the Moore matter. She remembered it very specifically because she'd been in the room when a decision was made that she'd been carrying like a stone ever since. "There was a meeting," she told Daniel over the phone, her voice shaking. "Maybe 14 months ago, senior leadership, and somebody put a slide up. I'll never forget it, a slide that said in plain English that Ms. Moore's technology was, and I'm quoting, unbeatable on the merits. Unbeatable on the merits. They knew they couldn't win a real fight. And then the next slide was the litigation strategy. And it wasn't about proving theft. It was about cost. It said the goal was to make defending the case cost more than surrendering the patents. That was the actual plan in writing. Bankrupt her until giving up is cheaper than fighting." Patricia's voice broke. I have the slides, Mr. Carter. I made a copy the day I quit because I couldn't stand that I'd been in that room. I've had them in a drawer for over a year, too scared to do anything. And then I saw you stand up in that courtroom and tell the truth about the worst thing you ever did. And I thought, if a janitor can do that, what's my excuse? Daniel closed his eyes and gripped the phone. Patricia, he said carefully, I need you to listen to me. What you're describing a document where a company admits it knows it can't win and lays out a plan to bankrupt the other side. Instead, that's not just embarrassing for Meridian. That could be the whole case. But it also means they're going to come after you the second they know you have it. You understand that the moment you hand this over, you become what Ms. Moore has been for 8 months, a target. There was a long silence on the line. I know, Patricia said finally. I watched what they did to her. I helped design some of it. A shaky breath. That's why I have to. Same as you, Mr. Carter. I can't keep being the person who was in the room and stayed quiet. But she brought the slides in that afternoon, and when Daniel saw them, the Meridian logo in the corner, the words unbeatable on the merits right there in a corporate font, he had to sit down. Because he'd hoped. He'd built a good case out of Meridian's own filings, a case good enough to win a hearing and earn a trial. But this was different. This wasn't inference. This was a confession written by the enemy in their own conference room, signed by their own arrogance. Evelyn, he called. She came in. He turned the slide toward her. He watched her read unbeatable on the merits, and he watched her understand what it meant. And he watched a year of terror and doubt and exhaustion come off her face all at once. They knew, she whispered. The whole time. They knew it was mine. They knew they couldn't beat it. And they came after me anyway. Just to make it too expensive to keep. They knew, Daniel said quietly. And now we can prove they knew. Patricia wasn't the last call. She was the first of many. Over the following week, 7 more former Meridian employees came forward. An engineer who'd been ordered to write a report he knew was false. An HR manager who'd been told to make retention offers to Evelyn's staff with instructions to mention personal details that would frighten them. A records clerk who remembered a notebook being logged into Meridian's archive 11 months ago under a case number that had nothing to do with any legitimate acquisition. One by one, the people who'd stayed silent started to speak, and every one of them said some version of the same thing. I saw you tell the truth, so I decided I could too. Daniel understood then that he'd done something bigger than win a hearing. Standing up in that courtroom, confessing his own worst act out loud, hadn't just neutralized Webb's weapon. It had given permission. It had shown a whole chain of frightened people that the truth was survivable, that a person could face the thing they were most ashamed of, say it in the light, and still be standing afterward. He'd meant it only as a way to protect himself and Evelyn. He hadn't understood it would spread. Meridian understood, though, and Meridian panicked. 9 days after the hearing, Webb requested a private meeting. Not in court, in a conference room, just counsel. And Daniel knew what that meant before he even walked in, because he'd sat on the other side of that exact table more times than he wanted to remember. When a company that swore it would fight forever suddenly wants a quiet room and no reporters, it means only one thing. The fight is over. Now they're just negotiating how much it costs them to make it disappear. Webb was already sitting when Daniel and Evelyn walked in. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago. The certainty was gone, and without it, he was just a tired man in an expensive suit. Mr. Carter, Webb said. Miss Moore, please, sit. They sat. I'm going to be direct, Webb said, because I think you've earned it, and because I don't have the energy to be anything else. He folded his hands. My client is prepared to make this go away. Full withdrawal of all claims. A public statement affirming that Ms. Moore is the sole and rightful inventor of her technology. And a financial settlement, a real one, an apology in the form of money in exchange for a release of all counterclaims and confidentiality regarding the terms. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at Webb for a long moment, and there was no triumph in his face, which surprised even himself. Confidentiality, Daniel said. That's the part that matters to you. You'll pay her. You'll admit she invented it. But you want the slides to disappear. You want Patricia Vance's meeting to have never happened. You want everything those 7 people told me sealed in a drawer forever. He leaned back. You want to lose quietly. I want my client to move forward, Webb said. I'm sure you do. Daniel glanced at Evelyn. But it's not my decision. It's hers. It was always hers. He turned to her. Evelyn, you can take this, right now. He'll give you your name back, he'll give you money, and it ends today, no trial, no risk, no more nights like the ones we've had. That's real, and it's a lot, and nobody on earth would blame you for saying yes. He held her eyes. Or you can say no and take it to trial and put those slides in front of a jury and let the whole world see exactly what Meridian did not just to you, but to Frank Delmont and everybody like him. That's the braver road. It's also the harder one. And the water technology you built, the thing your grandmother's stories built, if you go to trial and win, it doesn't just stay yours. It becomes proof. Public, permanent proof that a company like this can't do what they did and get away with it. That part won't be confidential. That part will belong to everyone. The room was silent. Webb watched Evelyn. Daniel watched Evelyn. And Evelyn Moore, who 2 weeks ago had walked into a courtroom hugging a cardboard box, told she'd already lost, sat very still for a moment, and then she turned to Webb. No confidentiality, she said. Webb closed his eyes. Ms. Moore, you can pay me or not pay me, Mr. Webb. I don't much care anymore, but I will never, as long as I live, sign a piece of paper that helps you hide what you did. Those slides are going to see daylight. Patricia's meeting happened, and the whole world is going to know it happened. And the notebook you took from my lab? Her voice didn't shake at all now. You're going to return it, and you're going to explain under oath how you got it. That's my offer. There's no quiet version. There was never going to be a quiet version. She stood up. You told me 2 weeks ago there was no shame in settling. Save myself the humiliation, you said. Do you remember? She almost smiled. I remember it every day. So here's what I've decided. The only person who's going to be humiliated when this is over is you. Webb didn't answer. There was nothing to answer. The case never made it back to a full jury trial in the end, but not because Evelyn backed down. It was because Meridian staring down the slides and the 7 witnesses, and a return of the notebook order that would have forced them to admit a burglary under oath folded completely. They gave Evelyn everything. The public statement. The money, more than they'd first offered, far more. The return of the notebook with an admission on the record of exactly how it had left her lab, which triggered a criminal referral that Daniel made sure went to a prosecutor who wouldn't bury it. And no confidentiality. Not a word of it. Everything Evelyn Moore had fought for in the open where it belonged. The board of Meridian Industries dismissed 3 executives within a month. Marcus Webb was not fired. Men like Webb rarely are. But the video of him standing speechless in Judge Vance's courtroom followed him everywhere now, and the whispered story of how a courthouse janitor had dismantled him became the kind of thing that made corporations think twice before hiring him for the big cases. Daniel didn't celebrate that. He'd been Webb once. He knew there was a version of himself, in some other life, sitting where Webb sat, losing what Webb lost. He didn't feel triumph about it. He just felt quietly grateful. Grateful he'd gotten out in time. Grateful. Frank Delmont's face had finally counted for something, instead of just haunting him. Because that was the part Daniel hadn't expected. Somewhere in all of it, without ever planning to, he'd made his peace with Frank Delmont. He drove out to see the old man 3 weeks after the settlement. He'd tracked him down. Frank was still alive, 84 now, living with his daughter in a small house 2 hours out of the city, the farm long gone. Daniel didn't know what he expected. He half thought Frank would slam the door in his face, and he'd have deserved it. Instead, the old man looked at him for a long moment on the porch, and something moved behind his eyes, and he said, "You're the lawyer. The one from before." And Daniel said, "Yes, sir. I came to tell you I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry you say to feel better. The kind you owe. And they sat on that porch for 2 hours, and Daniel told him everything what he'd done, why he'd quit what he'd been doing for 6 years, and what had happened in that courtroom. And Frank Delmont listened to all of it, and at the end he said, "The land's gone, son. My health's gone. You can't give me those back." A pause. "But I read about that water lady. In the paper. That was you." Daniel nodded, and Frank Delmont was quiet for a while, and then he said, "Then maybe the fella who did me wrong isn't the same fella sitting on my porch. Maybe that's the most a man can do. Become somebody different." He put out his hand. "Go on home to your girl." Daniel drove the 2 hours back with something in his chest he hadn't carried in 6 years. Not the absence of the stone. The stone was part of him now, it always would be, but something lighter sitting beside it. He'd stopped running from Frank Delmont. He'd turned around and faced him, and the old man had done something Daniel hadn't dared hope for. He'd let him go. Evelyn's company didn't just survive. It came roaring back. The publicity from the case, the janitor lawyer, the corporate frame job, the clean water inventor who wouldn't be crushed, brought investors who wanted to be on the right side of the story, and grant money from foundations that had watched the whole thing play out, and requests from a dozen countries where the water made children sick, the way it had made them sick in her grandmother's village. Within a year, Evelyn's filters were being built in places Daniel couldn't have found on a map. She sent him photographs sometimes. Wells in villages, kids around them. And in every one of those photos, Evelyn Moore was lit up again, radiant the way she'd been in that first newspaper picture before Meridian, before the cardboard box, before the morning her lawyer abandoned her 10 minutes before court. She offered Daniel a job. A real one. General counsel more money than he'd made in his corporate days. And Daniel thought about it for a long time, because it was a good offer from a good person doing good work. And then he said no. "I don't want to be a company lawyer again, Evelyn," he told her. "Even a good company, even yours. That's not, I did that. That's the road that led me to Frank Delmont." He shook his head. "I've been thinking about all those phone calls. Patricia, the 7 others. All those people who stayed quiet for years because fighting a company like Meridian felt impossible because the lawyers were too expensive and the odds were too long, and it was easier to just sign the paper and disappear." He looked at her. "Somebody should be there for those people. The ones who don't have a janitor happen to be standing in the back of their courtroom on the right morning. Somebody who knows exactly how the powerful people think because he used to be one." He almost smiled. "I think that's the job I'm supposed to have now. I think that's what the last 6 years were for." He opened a small practice. Just him at first, and then Marcus Reyes, who'd finished his own law degree, by then paid for partly by Evelyn, who never forgot the kid who stayed on the sinking ship, came on as his first partner. They took the cases nobody else would take. The single mother against the landlord with the expensive firm. The workers against the company that thought its money made the truth negotiable. The ordinary people who'd been told, the way Evelyn had been told, that they'd already lost before a single fact was heard. Daniel Carter, who knew every intimidation tactic because he'd once used them all, spent the rest of his career pointing that knowledge in the other direction. And he won more than he lost. Not always. Not everything. But enough. More than enough. He never stopped taking Ellie to school himself. That was the one thing he refused to give up, no matter how busy the practice got. The morning drive, the two of them, the ordinary miracle of it. And one morning, years later, when Ellie was 17 and about to leave for college, she told him she was going to study law. "You sure?" Daniel asked. "It's a hard road, baby. You've seen how hard." "I'm sure," Ellie said. "You know why?" She looked at her father, and her eyes weren't too old for her face anymore. She'd grown into them. "Because when I was 12, I watched a janitor stand up in a courtroom full of people who laughed at him and take a case everybody said he'd lose for a woman he'd never met because it was right." She smiled. "And I decided I wanted to be the kind of person who stands up. So I'm going to study law, and I'm going to take the cases nobody else will take. A beat. I learned it from my dad. Daniel Carter had to pull the car over for a minute. He didn't trust himself to drive. Years later, when people asked him about it, reporters mostly doing anniversary pieces on the case that had made him briefly famous, they always wanted the same thing, the dramatic version. The moment he decided to become a hero, and Daniel always disappointed them because there wasn't one. I didn't decide to be a hero, he'd say. I decided to stop being invisible. That's a different thing. Anybody can do it. You don't need a law degree. You just need to be willing to stand up when it costs you something on a morning when everybody else is sitting down. The men who'd laughed at him. Webb, the associates, the reporters who'd filmed his humiliation and captioned it, gets destroyed. Every one of them eventually understood the thing they hadn't understood in that courtroom. That the janitor in the gray uniform hadn't embarrassed himself at all. That the only people embarrassed in the end were the ones who'd been so certain a man's worth could be read off the uniform he wore. Daniel Carter had walked into that room carrying a mop, and he'd walked out carrying something none of them could buy, threaten, or take away. Because here is the truth, that a courthouse janitor taught an entire city on an ordinary morning that turned out to be anything but. A person's uniform can hide their past. Their money can't purchase their character, and their status will never once outweigh the simple, unkillable power of an ordinary man who finally decides to stand up. Daniel Carter was never the most powerful man in any room he walked into. He was only ever the one who refused to sit down. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything. That was the whole story. Asterisk.